evening on Farage tonight. Is this our 1937 moment, as the boss of Britain's armed forces says, as we face, he says, a big threat from Putin? We'll look at why two convicted paedophile criminals are not being deported to Pakistan. Yes, it's our old friend, ECHR, once again. And I'll be joined on Talking Pints by Lord Nigel Dodds, for many, many years, Deputy Leader of the DUP, and a man who served with the late, great Ian Paisley. We'll find out more about him too. But before all of that, let's get the news with Polly.
Nigel, thank you. The top story on GB News. The UK's largest police force has been placed under special measures following a series of failures. The Met Police faced heavy criticism following the death of Sarah Everard, who was killed by a serving officer. It'll now be monitored and scrutinised by Her Majesty's Inspectorate. The Home Secretary and London Mayor welcome the move, saying the force has failed to get the basics right. Sadiq Khan says the next challenge is appointing a new commissioner.
I will not be supporting the appointment of a new commissioner unless he gets it, unless he understands the challenges we face, unless he has an action plan to address some of the issues raised today by the police inspectorate, unless he is a reforming commissioner. Londoners deserve better. My job as the mayor is to make sure we get better.
Scotland's First Minister is launching a bid for a second independence referendum. The bill, which needs Westminster's approval first, proposes a vote for the 19th of October next year, asking the exact same question as in 2014, should Scotland be an independent country? Boris Johnson says it's not the time for a referendum, and now it's up to the Supreme Court to decide. Nicola Sturgeon says she won't allow Scottish democracy to be a prisoner of any Prime Minister.
The Conservatives have just 6 MPs in Scotland, barely 10% of Scottish representation, and yet they have ripped us out of the EU against our will. They have created the worst cost of living crisis in the G7 and saddled us with the second lowest growth in the G20.
The Prime Minister has been saying the G7 has shown the unity and resolve to keep giving Ukraine the help it needs. During the summit in Germany, Boris Johnson and other leaders accused the Russian President Vladimir Putin of war crimes after missiles hit a shopping centre in central Ukraine, killing at least 18 people.
I think people are just shocked by what Putin is capable of doing. And, if anything, it helped those of us who are making the case for helping to protect the Ukrainians to get that message across to some of those people who are more swing voters in the argument. They can see that this is utter barbarism.
Finally, the Queen has joined the armed forces at the Palace of Holyrood House as they marked her Platinum Jubilee in Scotland. Members of the Army, Navy and Air Force took part in a loyalty parade in the Palace Gardens. Her Majesty travelled to Edinburgh yesterday for the royal family's traditional Holyrood week of events. You're up to date on TV, online and on your radio via DAB+. You're with GB News, where now it's time for Farage.
Good evening. Now, there's a big NATO summit taking place tomorrow, and NATO, in many ways, has been revived by Putin's invasion of Ukraine. It was looking on pretty shaky ground after Sleepy Joe withdrew from Afghanistan, if you remember, in August last year, without even consulting his NATO colleagues on what had been, from start to finish, a NATO mission. So we'll find out tomorrow what the NATO leaders say. But today, an intervention from General Sir Patrick Sanders, and he's the new boss of the armed forces in this country. Let's just listen to what he had to say today.
I believe we're living through a period of history as profound as the one our forebears did 80 years ago. And now, as then, our choices will have a disproportionate effect on the future. This is our 1937 moment. We're not at war, but we must act rapidly so that we aren't drawn into one through a failure to contain territorial.
There you are. This is our 1937 moment. He's making a direct comparison between Hitler's territorial expansionism and that is being exercised by Vladimir Putin. Of course, you must understand, beneath all of this, when he talks about the will to fight, he is talking about the defence of NATO territory. And right at the moment, even though there was that monstrous cruise missile attack yesterday on a shopping centre, and given the accuracy of cruise missiles, that just cannot have been an accident. But there are not any Russian troops or tanks anywhere near threatening NATO at the moment. But I wonder whether this isn't just about defending the integrity of NATO, sending the clear message to Putin. I think there's a subplot here, because General Sir Richard Dannett, another former boss of Britain's armed forces, he said yesterday, during the Cold War, we had 4 armoured divisions in Germany ready to take on the Soviet threat. Today, we couldn't even muster one. And all of this against a background of a Conservative government that is cutting the size of the army substantially. So part of me thinks this is about NATO coming together, but another part of me thinks this is about top brass in this country sending a very, very strong message to Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson. That's my view, but please tell me what you think. Is this, in your opinion, our 1937 moment? Let me have your views. Farage at gbnews.uk. Now, joining me to discuss this is a former Armed Forces Minister, which is, I think, pretty relevant, Lord Andrew Robotham. Andrew, tell me, explain to me, how is it that under Conservative Prime Ministers since 2010, we've slashed the armed forces to the extent that we have?
Well, first, can I confess that I was a minister in 2010 in the Defence Review. I nearly resigned, and I was told by a friend, Dip, so damn stupid, if you resign, they'll just put somebody else in who won't. But it's not been just since 2010, it's been since 1990. That 30 years.
Options for change. John
30
Major.
years we have spent the peace dividend time and time again. Now, I was in the army in the 1980s, and I spent a year looking east to the Warsaw Pact and the Soviet hordes. And we had, as Dan said, we had 55,000 troops there facing that way. Tanks galore, fighter aircraft, the lot. We've wasted them. We got rid of them. Now, change needs to happen. I don't deny that at all. But we've whittled the army down and the Navy and the Air Force far too far, and we're in a ridiculous situation. We have a war going on in Europe on our doorstep, and we are still, as we speak, reducing the number of troops, aircraft.
So
and ships.
why is your party doing it?
I don't speak for my party. I have been banging on.
But it's your party that's
I know.
doing
I
it.
have been banging on ad nauseam in the House of Lords about it. I think it's absolutely bonkers. We need to realise that this is the most dangerous time in our lives since 1963. Probably the most dangerous time for in most of your viewers' lives. This is shockingly dangerous, and we are still cutting our forces.
All right, so,
and that matters much more than spending money on other issues.
So, is my first point correct?
Yes.
That there is a subplot here from Dannett?
I think it's a subplot. I think I don't think it's coordinated. We all can see.
All right.
Not enough money has been spent on defence.
As for the threat from Putin, now we know he's got this sort of czarist dream of bringing this concept of Greater Russia back together. Is he a threat to NATO countries?
Oh, well, you know...
Is he a rational player?
The 30s is a good analogy. And we need to remember that Hitler told us what he was going to do, and he did it. Slaughter all the Jews. That's what he's put in Mein Kampf. What we have here is Putin, who said what he wants to do. He wants to expand Russia. He wants to take over the Baltic states again. He wants to, whatever he wants in the east, probably Poland, the west in Poland. But he's not rational, I'm afraid. He may be very ill. Nobody really knows. But he's not rational. He's a dictator, and he has nuclear weapons, and this should frighten everybody.
Are we not in danger of escalating and provoking Putin even further?
Sorry, did we provoke him to invade Ukraine?
No, I'm asked. When you have a conflict, very often both sides escalate the language and it ends with mistakes being made. Are we right at this moment in time to say we're putting 300,000 troops on red alert?
I think we're absolutely right. And I'm afraid, going back to the analogy, we have Macron cozying up to Putin, saying, oh, well, perhaps we can save his face and whatnot. Just remember Daladier, the French Prime Minister, at 1938 in Munich, where they told the Czechs they had to give away the Sudetenland. And that ended well.
Yep. So you see an analogy between
There's an
that
analogy.
and
I hope it's not exact. I don't want a third world war, but there is a huge analogy.
Yeah.
And when Ben Wallace talked about the whiff of Munich, he's absolutely right.
Okay.
We need to be strong, because I'm sure you know that in the Fulton, Missouri speech in 1946, Winston Churchill, having talked about the Iron Curtain, said, having worked with our allies, the Russians, over the last 5 years, or 4 years, whatever it was, I can tell you there's one thing they respect, and that's strength, particularly military strength. And they went on and said there's one thing they despise, and that's weakness, particularly military weakness. And that's what we and NATO and the West as a whole have shown.
And Germany, of course, still funding the war.
Hopeless.
Still funding the war, and Italy to a certain extent as well.
And war is painful.
So does NATO? I mean, and we know that some of the newer members of NATO, like Poland, are genuinely and deeply committed to it. Huge question marks around France, Germany, and their commitment to any of this. But the big one, of course, is America. I felt after Afghanistan, how could we ever trust America with Joe Biden in charge? Do you think some of that damage has been mended? I
think some of it has been mended. I think Biden, who you referred to as Sleepy Joe very unkindly.
I don't think so, do you?
He has been saying the right things. He's been sending munitions to Ukraine, as have we, and we're top of the list of people sending munitions to Ukraine. But, of course, as we send these munitions, our stockpiles dwindle. We've got none left. We've got to spend money on them. But, yes, I think Biden has been good. I'm afraid Germany needs to look itself in the eye and say, can we really be funding Putin's war machine like this? This is disgraceful. And, yes, it'll be painful for their economy. Yes, it'll be painful for their heating in the winter. But, you know, war is painful, and better this than letting Putin continue on his march.
Do you believe that if the territory of Estonia was violated by the Russian army, that America would come to Estonia's defence?
I do, actually, yes, I do.
And is that the message that will come from the NATO summit tomorrow?
I hope so. God, I hope so. But I'm afraid, as you've already identified, one or two of the key players, particularly Germany and France, are weak.
Wobbly, to say the very least.
Wobbly, if you like. Yes, absolutely.
Lord Robertson, thank you very much indeed for coming in. Keep on fighting for British Armed Forces, please. Now, a speech today in the Scottish Parliament by Nicola Sturgeon, and it's a script I think that you will have heard before. But let's see what Nicola had to say today.
Presiding Officer, I can announce that the Scottish Government is proposing that the independence referendum be held on the 19th of October 2023.
So, it's not a referendum, it's a never-endum. It's going to go on forever. That once-in-a-generation referendum that Scotland had in 2014 has, within a few short years, now been demanded again by the Scottish First Minister. And, of course, a couple of years after that, there was another referendum, another once-in-a-generation referendum, which was the entirety of the United Kingdom voting on whether we should remain or leave the European Union. It would appear that Nicola Sturgeon and all of the Scottish nationalists don't actually respect any referendum result whatsoever. It's completely and utterly beyond me why. I genuinely don't understand it. I don't get it. But I suppose it is the raison d'etre for the SNP. If they haven't got a referendum to fight for, if they haven't got separation to fight for, then what's the point, frankly, of them being in existence? The one thing about this that really does infuriate me is that my campaign, which I was involved in for, I think, about 27 years in all, which was for the independence of the United Kingdom. And remember, UKIP was the UK Independence Party. I wanted us to be genuinely independent, not to have European law put upon us, something over which we only had a very, very tiny vote. So freed from the European Union, I saw us as being an independent country. Yet we keep, from the Scottish media, from the mainstream media here in London, it keeps being referred to as independence. I don't get it if they all want to be part of the European Union as well. Well, to help me unpack this, and I hope explain this word independence, is Neil Hanvey, leader of the Albert Party in the House of Commons. Neil, you know, fine, you don't want London, you don't want old Etonians telling you what you can and can't do. I get it. I understand it. I'm not sure I agree with it, but I get it. But how is it independence if you want Brussels to rule you?
Well, let's start off with that, Nigel,
Please.
because that's not the position of the Alpha Party. We don't want to immediately return to the EU, as the SNP are suggesting. We believe that EFTA is an important consideration, and that would resolve some of the cross-border issues.
Alex Salmond's changed his mind on all of this.
Well, I mean, it's a different proposition. The world has moved on since 2014.
Yes.
In 2014, we were members of the EU, and we were concerned about your party taking us out of the EU, and we were told that the only way to remain in the EU was to stay in the Union.
But I repeat the question. So Nicola Sturgeon, OK, you're Alba. You know, I know there's been a big fallout, and I get it, that you know, Salmond and you have a slightly different position on this. I get that. And the world has changed.
Yes.
But Nicola Sturgeon still insists that Scotland will be members of the European Union and independent. You can't be both.
Well, that's a case for Nicola Sturgeon to answer.
But you defended that for years too.
But, well, I didn't.
Well,
I defended being in the EU, but now that we're out of the EU, we have to reconsider where we are. So we have to reposition ourselves.
I will ask the SNP that question directly. But let me ask you another important question.
Can I just finish that point?
Go on, please.
So the ultimate decision about whether we join EFTA or join the EU after independence, that's a matter for the Scottish people. That's not for me to decide, and it's not for Nicola Sturgeon to decide. That is a political case that will be made after independence.
But if you are voting to leave London, it's quite important to tell people where you're going. And
we will make the arguments for EFTA.
So what currency would you use?
Well, we believe that we should have our own currency as swiftly as possible. So it would be a Scottish pound or something.
With your own central bank?
Yes. So we've got. I ran through the list of our energy resources today at Treasury Questions, and we've got 8% of the UK population, 98% of crude oil reserves.
That depends where you draw the border. There's a big dispute over that. There's a big dispute over that.
I think you've
redrawn the international map.
Absolutely.
I think a lot of those oil fields are actually in English, but that's by the by.
Those are the facts. We have a robust economy.
Alex Salmond led that campaign, that separation referendum in 2014 with terrific energy and zest. He did get very caught out on the question of currency and the question of the EU, and in the end we know a third of SNP members voted for Brexit. So there was always that difficulty. There was always that divide there. But Salmond made it clear, and Sturgeon, his deputy at the time, made it clear, this was a once-in-a-lifetime vote. Is it fair to inflict this again on people?
I don't think it was once in a lifetime. I think it was
once in a generation,
And so if you look at
a
political generation as defined in the Good Friday Agreement is 7 years, and we're now well beyond that 7 years. So it's time to revisit the question. And to go back to that point that you made earlier, look, the question of independence would not be on the agenda if the Scottish people didn't vote for parties who support the case for independence. The reason that this issue has continued to be alive is because people have consistently, since 2014, voted.
They're voting for Scottish parties. They're voting for Scottish parties as opposed to English-led parties, and I can see that. But I mean, I have to say, it does seem to me, given the level of devolved powers that Scotland has. And let's be frank, given how badly education's gone, given how badly the Scottish budget, I mean 22% deficit this year, despite all the English money that we give you. And it seems to me, actually...
That's actually recycled from Scottish money, actually.
Well, I think we spend a lot more taxpayers' money per head in Scotland than we do in England. But it seems to me that put to the Scottish people, they'd just say no again, wouldn't they?
I don't think so. And I'm absolutely undeterred by the 50-50 in the polls at the moment. The last time we started the referendum campaign around 2012, after the 2011 majority win by Alex Salmond, the polls were somewhere around 26 to 30%. We managed to put 15% on that during that campaign to take us up to 45%. And don't forget, it was over 50%. It was 51% before the vow was announced. So we made great progress during that campaign. But going back to the point about the Scottish Government and their challenges, I'm not here to defend the Scottish Government. The SNP
but I'm saying that the Scottish people will look at it and say we haven't done that great a job.
And that's why it's so important that this campaign is about a popular movement in the, as it was a grassroots movement in the previous referendum, and we cut that link with the Scottish Government so that their day-to-day challenges don't become the problems of the independence referendum.
Whether I agree with you or not, I'm never going to knock people for having political dreams and fighting for them for years, because I did very much the same thing. What is interesting in this debate, I think, is we don't really talk very much about how the English are feeling about this. Remember, the English are 86% of the population of the United Kingdom, and I kind of feel there's a sort of an apathy and an antipathy towards this. 25% of English people, when they were last polled, said they'd like actually Scotland to leave the Union. But most people feel a little bit numbed by it all, and perhaps a little bit bored by Nicola Sturgeon asking for the same thing again and again and again. It is, as I told you earlier, folks, a never-endum as opposed to a referendum. In a minute, we'll look at the case in Rochdale. 2 men convicted, put in prison in 2012 for those absolutely heinous crimes against underage girls, now cannot be deported back to Pakistan. Why? It's our old friend, the European Convention on Human Rights. More of that in just a moment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV. On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
So is the Chief of the General Staff right in saying this is our 1937 moment? Your reactions. Darryl says the General does seem slightly gung-ho and doesn't seem to have noticed that the General Staff and political class have been running down our armed forces for the past 25 years. Well, that was exactly, wasn't it, what Lord Rotherham was saying? Ever since Options for Change was introduced by John Major in 1990, we have slashed the size of the armed forces, despite, for many, many years, asking them to do more and more and more. And generally, we've cut the forces far more under Conservative Prime Ministers than we have under Labour ones. Audrey says, Boris is deliberately and irresponsibly escalating the conflict. He is nothing but a warmonger and has no mandate to waste our money on Ukraine when there are more urgent matters to take care of in the UK. Stephen says, Putin wants it. At some point, he's going to have to be put in his place. And finally, another says, who started the invasion? Do we all want to repeat what happened in World War II? Avoiding confrontation is only seen as weakness to dictators. It won't prevent any wars. Well, we'll get that NATO summit tomorrow, and we will report on what is said by the NATO leaders. But it is a very different looking NATO to the one that was in such disarray after the withdrawal from Afghanistan last year. Although, as we've said already on this programme, the position of France and Germany is pretty uncertain. Now remember the appalling cases 10 years ago, and Rochdale was one of those northern towns afflicted. Grooming gangs, underage girls, sexually abused on pretty much an industrial scale. Luckily, in the end, the forces of the law did work, having been much criticised to begin with for perhaps turning a blind eye to something that was going on for fear of being thought racist. And the problem was even more acute because so many of the men involved were people from Pakistan, and that made talking about it even more difficult. But yesterday, an immigration tribunal ruled that 2 of the men heavily involved in the trafficking and sexual exploitation of young girls, 2 of them who, due to be deported, will now not be deported because it would infringe their human rights if they're sent back to Pakistan. No matter about the human rights of the young girls that lived in Rochdale, it is because we are still signatories to the European Convention on Human Rights. I think the whole thing is pretty appalling. And joining me is Maggie Oliver, best known for being a former detective constable in the Greater Manchester Police and for exposing the Rochdale child grooming scandal. Maggie, good evening and thank you for joining us.
Good evening, Nigel. Thank you for having me on.
Well, not at all, and well done you for the work you did, the brave work you did in exposing all of this, and I suppose getting convictions in court, putting these men in prison was part of your success story. But how do you feel, given that the Home Secretary at the time, Theresa May, said very clearly these people should be deported, and now, after lengthy legal battles, they're going to be allowed to stay? How does that make you feel?
Angry, actually livid, but actually, Nigel, I don't.
Right, we have lost the link, which is a terrific bore, because she was just the person that we wanted to speak to on this very subject. But we'll do our best to get Maggie back, and as soon as we do, we will go straight back to her. Now, 25 years ago... right, she's back. Maggie, I've got you back.
I'm sorry, I don't know what happened there, my signal. Anyway, I don't see this case as a success on any level, from the charges to the convictions to the time spent in prison to this latest fiasco. And actually, my understanding, Nigel, is that the 2 men have not had a decision. But what has happened is that one of the 3 who was ordered to be deported he accessed a legal loophole. So 5 days before this got to court, he reneged on his Pakistani citizenship. And so for 4 years, the Home Secretary and Sajid Javid have known that he was not going to be deported. That has only just come to light. And the other 2 abusers who are fighting deportation have argued that because he isn't being deported, nor should they be. And the other thing that makes me so angry is that one of the abusers, Adil Khan, who got a 13-year-old child pregnant where we had a fetus and DNA, he's got the cheek to even say that he's entitled to a family life, that his son deserves a role model. The whole system is broken.
That's unbelievable.
It's shocking. It just, this case exposes time and time again the failures in our criminal justice system. And my take on it is that these men gave up their human rights when they did what they did. Where are the human rights of the victims? What about the children who walk around, they're young women now, walk around Rochdale every day in danger of coming face to face with their abusers? Where are their human rights? And our whole system is flawed. There is no equality. It is not balanced. It is all, weighted in in favour of the abusers, who, for me, should not even be walking the streets.
No, listen, you've said that with great passion and great feeling, and I absolutely understand why, and I'm sure everyone watching and listening to that feels very much as you do. But the heart of the matter and the reason we have protracted, lengthy battles when it comes to deporting foreign criminals, when it comes to deporting terrorists, when it comes to deporting those who come to this country with no rightful claim across the English Channel by small boat, is because we're signed up to the European Convention on Human Rights. We've written it into UK law with the Human Rights Act. And it really means that the police and the courts in the end go round in circles for year after year. Is it time we left ECHR? Is it time we actually dealt with just British law without that interference?
You know what, Nigel? I feel, after my journey, the last 10 years, I have seen corruption at the highest level. And I have seen how, you only look at this case time and time again. I do believe that innocent people do need some protection from the authorities that would otherwise trample all over them. But what I would also say is that these men have had millions in legal aid. We should be using our system to protect those who need protecting. I don't think the issue here is human rights. I think the issue here is that very clever lawyers find a loophole and exploit that at the expense of victims. Anybody in this country listening to what we're saying now would feel that this is not a human right. This is actually not right. It comes down to right and wrong, and there are some things that are so wrong that Human Rights Act or not, they are wrong. These men were released from prison on parole. They never showed any remorse. The system should not have released them. There are failures right through this whole shebang. Where were the representations on behalf of the victims in this case? There are so many flaws in the system. I think to say that the European...
No, I agree with you. I agree with you.
That the treaty itself is there, whether it's run by Europe or not. I would like a body other than the police and the courts to go to when I am being trampled all over.
Maggie, before the Human Rights Act, beginning with Magna Carta and evolving ever since then, I think we had a pretty good, pretty fair judicial system that did actually give rights, far more rights and far more liberty perhaps than other European countries. We'll debate that another time, but I think the essence of what is going on here, you've put your finger on. This is about right and wrong, and what is happening thus far in terms of deportations is wrong. And I thank you very much for coming on the programme this evening. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, Nigel.
Well, it's very, Maggie Oliver there, very, very passionate indeed about that case. And she, of course, had to deal with all of this horrendous stuff at first hand. Now, something else that's gone on over the course of the last day, which I find pretty extraordinary, it is a what the Farage moment, is it's 25 years since J.K. Rowling's books, the Harry Potter series, came out. The books came out, they've sold astonishing numbers, they've been turned into hugely successful films. But when Sky News yesterday wanted to interview Tom Felton about the 25th anniversary of the launch of those books that has made people like him so hugely wealthy and successful, this is what happened.
Yeah, it really is, isn't it? And you're sort of, you're still very much, you and the other stars of the film are sort of very much still the face of the franchise, if you like. We sort of, speak to you and hear from you guys, and as I was just saying, you get asked about it all the time. JK obviously has a sort of more of a backseat now. Is it strange, kind of her not being around at things like this?
Next question, please.
Oh, okay.
So there you are. There you are. Any conversation, and it's shut down by the PR immediately. It's a disgrace. Now, we're going to go to Polly Middlehurst. There is some breaking news from a New York courtroom.
Nigel, thank you. The breaking news this hour on GB News. Ghislaine Maxwell has been sentenced to 20 years in prison for helping the sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. The British socialite was found guilty last December of luring young girls to the financier between 1994 and 2004. Miss Maxwell apologised to her victims in court, saying she hoped the sentence would allow them peace and finality. So that just through to us within the last few moments. Ghislaine Maxwell has been sentenced to 20 years in a US prison for helping the former US financier Jeffrey Epstein abuse young girls. She was convicted last December on 5 charges of recruiting and trafficking 4 teenage girls abused by Epstein, who was then her boyfriend. One of her accusers said outside court that she should remain in prison for the rest of her life. More detail on that when we get it.
Polly, thank you for that. And 20 years the sentence there for Ghislaine Maxwell. Actually, a lower sentence than many had predicted, but at the age of 66, it does mean at least most of the rest of her life will be spent in that prison. Does sound like she did at last show some degree of remorse. In a moment, it will be time for Talking Pints. I'll be joined by Lord Nigel Dodds of the DUP.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
It's that time of the day. Yes, it really is. It's time for Talking Pints, and I'm joined by Nigel Dodds, or of course Lord Dodds, as we now have to call you, now that you're such a part of the establishment.
Yes. Well, I wouldn't necessarily describe myself as part of the establishment. When you're from Northern Ireland, a democratic unionist, you know, some people in the Lords look at you as if, you know, what are we going to get here? What are we going to get here? But
yeah.
I've been around Westminster a long time now, so I know how it works.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because you qualify as a barrister, and you perhaps could have had, a stellar career in the law and not had any aggro in your life, or made money, but it's been really, you've given pretty much the whole of your adult life in service to what was the Tiddler political party in Northern Ireland. It was the Democratic Unionist Party. The Ulster Unionists were absolutely there as the dominant force in unionism. And here was the little DUP, and you served for years as the General Secretary, for many more years as the Deputy Leader. And for most of that time, under this very dominant figure of Ian Paisley. And for those watching and listening who don't remember Ian Paisley, we're going to show you a clip from him in the mid-1980s. So watch and listen to this right now.
And yet Mrs. Thatcher tells us that Republic
must have some say in our province. We say never, 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 never.
Well, I mean, I don't quite know what to say. I mean, I think I had some politically oratorical skills at times, but I mean, the power, the passion. Now, I got to know him a bit in the European Parliament. You knew him incredibly well, and you also knew that basically most people on the mainland, their knowledge of Ian Paisley was through the 9 o'clock news and how the BBC wished to portray him, and kind of, he was seen to be this kind of monster figure with views on the Pope that sort of many thought took us back to medieval times. What was he like as a human being?
Well, as you say, that clip in particular, which was the 1985 rally against the Anglo-Irish Agreement, where all the Northern Ireland MPs resigned their seats en masse in order to get a democratic mandate against the imposition of this agreement, which unionists saw as imposing Dublin involvement in Northern Ireland's affair, the internal affairs of the United Kingdom. So there's some issues that don't go away. They're the same. We're still dealing with some of those issues today. I remember that particular day, actually, because Jim Molyneux, who was the leader of the then Ulster Unionist Party, and Ian were ready to go out with the other MPs, and there were some people actually on the stage, the massive platform. There were about 200,000 people waiting for these politicians to come out, and there were people actually up on the platform, and I was sent out as a humble councillor indeed to get them off the platform. You can imagine what that was like, sort of, you know, the eyes of Northern Ireland on you. But no, it was Ian was an incredibly powerful orator. He was a great preacher of the gospel. So he knew how to speak to an audience, to a crowd, at a very, you know, to a massive audience, but also almost as if he was speaking to you one-to-one. And on a private basis, I mean, he was remarkably well liked in the corridors of Westminster and in the European Parliament. People who disagreed with him vehemently politically got on with him famously.
I found him charming.
Yeah.
I mean almost Edwardian manners.
Yes.
He'd hold doors open and say hello to everybody.
And he never held a grudge. He could argue, you know, really forthrightly with, you know, political opponents, but afterwards he would be charming, as you say, and generous and helpful to people. I mean, he had a great reputation as the North Antrim MP, as someone to whom, you know, many Roman Catholic constituents, nationalists who wouldn't support him in a million years for his unionism, but supported him because of the way he dealt with them and his pastoral role. He was a complex character, but he was a great
and the little DUP, which you attach yourself to. Well, it's still the little DUP. I know all about this. UKIP was tiny too, so I know all about this.
We built it up, though, into something quite big in Northern Ireland.
I mean, boy, you know, you became the biggest party. He became the First Minister. Was this a reaction to what was seen in Northern Ireland as perhaps London turning its back on the province?
Yeah, I think there was a feeling that the Ulster Unionist Party had become too sort of part of the establishment, is what we were talking about earlier. We need to be careful. We need to be careful. Learn the lessons of history. But and I think the DUP represented an authentic voice of unionism, and it was also very good on the ground at working and helping people. Ian's example in North Antrim paved the way for a lot of others, and they followed that example. So we did grow from a point where we were really the really small partner in unionism to being the dominant, but to the extent now that, you know, we have 8 MPs at Westminster, and the Ulster Unionists don't have any at all. So there's been a massive sea change.
There has, but there's been a sea change on the other side of the divide as well.
Absolutely. Where, you know, John Hume, who was
a very, very big figure again.
Massive figure, and him and Ian Paisley dominated the European elections in Northern Ireland. There were only 3 MEPs. They were the 2 main people. And now, of course, the SDLP don't even have a seat.
They used to make me laugh, because when I was first there, John Hume and Ian Paisley, and John Hume liked the members' bar.
Yes.
If you know what I mean, in Strasbourg, and I too quite like the members' bar in Strasbourg, and I found him, you know, very expansive, very interesting man. Very interesting man. And I was very struck. I thought a profoundly decent man as well. And then sometimes Ian Paisley would come in, And I mean, it must have looked to him like the last days of Sodom and Gomorrah, you know, champagne corks popping, and he would sit in the middle of the members' bar. You perhaps remember this of your visits and your time there. Sit in the members' bar reading the Good News Bible. I thought the sort of cross between the two.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's one thing about him. I mean, he lived his Christianity, and it was a real thing. I mean, he would have read the Bible. I mean, I remember one time the flight out to Strasbourg, all the British MEPs and the Irish MEPs would all go together on this charter flight. It was called the by-election special, morbidly enough. And we'd all fly out, and we came through this really bad turbulence on the way into Strasbourg, and some of the MEPs were, you know, it's terrible, terrible. Ian, pray for us. And Ian was saying, reading the Bible, you know, saying, don't worry, your time hasn't come yet. And, you know, he was just, he really lived it out, you know. But, I mean, he enjoyed Europe and the European Parliament, although he was a Brexiteer before it was popular. He was always very consistent that he believed the United Kingdom shouldn't be in the European Union or the European Community then. But he did a very effective job, along with John Hume, for the people of Northern Ireland.
I agree with that.
And he enjoyed that international stage.
But John Hume's gone.
Yep.
And the SDLP has gone the same way as the Ulster Unionist Party, and it's now Sinn Féin on the march.
Yes.
But not just in Northern Ireland, but in the Republic as well.
That's right.
I mean, what does this mean? When you know, I know that you fought for your political life, and it's your great passion for Northern Ireland to be a full part of the United Kingdom, which is why ultimately the Brexit deal is so offensive to you. But if you look 10, 20, 30 years down the road, Nigel, in your heart, do you think Northern Ireland stays part of the UK?
I do, because if you look back through history, people have been saying from the 1920s, the 1930s, that there would come a time in a few decades where Unionists would be outvoted and that there would be a united Ireland. And it has never happened, because there are a large number of people who may not be Protestant by birth, and there's increasingly a lot of people in Northern Ireland who don't describe themselves as belonging to any church at all, but who see the merits.
That's a big change,
It is a big change, but they see the merits. There's a substantial number. If it came to a referendum, they may not vote for a unionist party, but if it came to a referendum, they would vote for the union, because being part of the fifth or sixth biggest economy, when they look at the Irish Republic, yes, it's done well in recent years, but they have a lot of problems.
A National Health Service, which of course the Republic doesn't have.
Where you pay for your appointments, you pay for your eye tests, you pay for this, that and the other, where the housing situation is really, really challenging, where, interestingly enough, Sinn Féin keep telling us in the north, you need to join with the Irish Republic, and then down south, whether they be an opposition party, they're laying into the government, saying it's all terrible down here. You know, I mean, there's no logic to it. I say the best advertisement for staying out of United Ireland is listen to Sinn Féin's tirades in the Dáil against the current government.
Yeah, I mean, he couldn't invent some of this stuff, but then parties are good at that. But that's what's happened. But Northern Ireland itself, you know, and I think the truth of it is the British establishment has kind of said, we don't want to know. You know, John Major once famously said, we have no selfish interest in Northern Ireland. We have no selfish interest in part of our own country. And when it comes to news items, etc., Northern Ireland has been tucked into this sort of other status. But, so most English people have never even been to Northern Ireland. But those of us that are old enough have, I mean, you grew up all through the Troubles, which were pretty horrific, weren't they?
Yeah, no, look, I mean, I remember I was brought in a beautiful part of the world, down in County Fermanagh, the lakes and all of Fermanagh, in my early years. But, I mean, living in Belfast through as a student and so on through the Troubles was difficult, but Belfast now is an incredible place to come and visit. And Northern Ireland, you know what it is. And, you know, we have had some spectacular events there. Beautiful countryside, fantastic restaurants. The whole nightlife scene has really taken off. And, you know, Northern Ireland really is a great place to come to visit, but also a great place to live. I mean, the standard of living is good. Our schools are first rate. Our education system is excellent. And so, you know, we have a lot to be proud of. I mean, Northern Ireland...
Are you working for the Northern Irish Tourist Board?
Which I was sometimes, but no, not sadly.
But, so you're saying to people, actually, it's a very safe place to come. It's got a lot going for it.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, anyone who comes... And the hospitality of the people. The people in Northern Ireland are a generous... People used to joke, you know, they're just cruel and nasty to each other, you know, but outsiders are very... But, I mean, that's changed as well. And, of course... That's what people remark upon. Even during the darkest days of the Trouble, people would come to Northern Ireland and say, you know, people in Northern Ireland are friendly. They're outgoing. They say hello to you in the street. If they meet you once, they'll say hello again.
And they make the most enormous breakfasts.
Yes, there's certainly no doubt about
the Ulster fry.
The Ulster fry is infamous everywhere you go. And the amount of soda bread and tatty farls and all that stuff. Yeah,
so was it all worth it? I mean, you know, some massive concessions were made at the time of the Belfast Agreement. Massive concessions were made. And you talk about Belfast today, and I've been in the last couple of years and seen it, and it looks like a modern British city to me in operation. Those sacrifices and compromises were worth it.
Yeah, well, look, some of them at the time we opposed, and we did get some stuff rectified.
I remember.
Some of it is now past the board. But I think also we've got to remember that Northern Ireland is still part of the United Kingdom. We have this protocol issue to sort out. It's a real danger to Northern Ireland's future if we don't get it sorted, because Brexit then isn't really done as far as the United Kingdom's concerned. But yesterday in the House of Commons we had the second reading of the bill to hopefully put some of that right. And if we can get that sorted out, then I think we can look forward to a very good future within the United Kingdom. And I have no doubt that that will be the case for decades
biggest threat
to come.
to unionism. Biggest threat to unionism is the split within unionism.
Yes.
You know, there's a TUV. There were three parties, three identifiable unionist parties.
Well, you were talking earlier about people in Britain, you know, and they would look at the three unionist parties in Northern Ireland and say, what on earth is this about? There's hardly any difference.
I think we say they're all mad over
that.
But you are, but literally, politically shooting yourselves in the feet.
And Sinn Féin are only the biggest party by 3 seats because of those divisions within unionism. And so, look, our appeal has been, as we are the biggest party now, and we have a responsibility to reach out to others. And Jeffrey Donaldson, our leader, has put that invitation out that there needs to be better cooperation, working together. I would love to see the day that there was one unionist party, that there was one movement which brought everybody together of all wings and sections of unionism.
You need it. And a final thought. What's it like being a Lord?
Well, it's very different from being an MP. You have a great platform in the House of Lords. I'm very privileged to have that platform, but you don't have a constituency. And I had the honour...
So no one to answer to?
No one to answer to, except, well, the party rings you occasionally, and some people do hold you to account who remain in the background in terms of the party. But in terms of the constituency, I love the constituency work. I had a very challenging constituency in North Belfast, an inner city constituency with a lot of problems and challenges. But not having that amount of time to spend on those issues means you have a lot more time to do the policy stuff, the networking, to promote the union in a whole lot of ways that I couldn't have time to do previously. And I'm enjoying that immensely.
Well, after all these years, you're not going to stop, are you? Nigel Dodds, thank you for joining me on Talking Pints.
Cheers.
Very good indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Just wait here then.
It is time now for Barrage the Farage, where you, the viewers, send in your questions. I do not see them beforehand. Here goes. One viewer asks, has the government given up on Northern Ireland following the Brexit deal? Well, of course, there was a time when the Conservative government, of course, needed the votes of these chaps in 2017.
That's right.
What good it did you in the end? Have they given up on Northern Ireland?
Well, I mean, they've brought the protocol bill forward. You know, that's progress. We need to see it delivered. We'll see. We'll keep their feet to the fire.
I would answer this by saying that we've actually tried to forget about and demote Northern Ireland for years, but now what has happened as a result of the Brexit deal, the threat to the Union, what it could mean for Scotland also means actually the government hasn't given up on Northern Ireland. I just hope they've got the guts to sort it out properly. Mike asks, do you believe the census figures are accurate? Mike, there were some census figures out today showing the population of England and Wales had risen but stalled. I don't believe any of these figures. I think there are huge numbers of people now who just don't fill in census forms. They want to keep away from the tax man or whatever else it may be. And certainly, if you were here illegally, you wouldn't fill in a census form. So I'm very, very sceptical about those figures. Moving on, Bob asks, has Boris Johnson got the courage to soften his position on green policies in order to allow the nation to survive the present crisis? Bob, I just don't know. But what I do know is this policy we've had for years of exporting manufacturing jobs and importing energy that we could produce here may make him feel great at the G7, where they all prayed together as the trendies not wearing ties and aren't we cool and aren't we great. But the reality is our CO2 emissions may have gone down, but as a result of all the imports we bring in from the rest of the world of manufacturers and indeed of energy, net to the world, it puts CO2 up. So the whole thing is absolutely, completely nuts. Tomorrow, big NATO summit. We'll be looking at the main messages that come from that. We'll discuss those tomorrow evening. I'll be in this chair with you tomorrow evening at 7 p.m. But right now, I'm handing you over to Mark Stein.
Great show, Nigel. I love that blood-curdling, fire-breathing Ian Paisley clip. Terrific to see him again. I was thinking I'd do the whole next hour in my Ian Paisley impression, but I'm not sure I can keep it up for more than 2 minutes. On tonight's Mark Stein Show, the controlled demolition of the Western world, or at least the UK, continues. You can't get out of the country, and nor can convicted grooming gang leaders who've been stripped of their citizenship, supposedly. Plus, we have some actual good news for you. I don't know how that happened. It's probably just a typing error, but it's all coming up after the weather.
Good evening. Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update. Tomorrow will be a day of sunshine, but also some showers. And the showers will be pretty heavy where they do develop. The winds will be lighter, which means the showers will be fairly slow moving. It's been quite windy today because of this area of low pressure. Quite a few isobars on the chart, blustery and wet, especially in the west from this weather front, which is now just slowly creeping eastwards, so turning soggy through the evening and overnight across the Midlands, more central parts of southern England and northeast England too. Whereas East Anglia and the southeast generally stay dry. A few showers follow across West Wales and southwest England. Temperatures holding up in the teens in most towns and cities. The details for Wednesday, it's going to be fairly messy. It looks like starting pretty drab and damp over northeast England. That rain soon spreading into the northeast of Scotland before heading out into the North Sea. And then we're left with some sunshine and the showers, which will really develop from late morning and through the afternoon. Some heavy ones likely over northern England, parts of eastern Scotland, but also South Wales and southwest England. They will be hit and miss. Not everywhere seeing the showers, not too many. Of course, East Anglia and the southeast, and the sunny spells here 23 or 24 is possible. Elsewhere, we're generally looking at high teens to low 20s. Still some showers around through Wednesday evening. We're likely to see more of them drifting northwards over Wales, northwest England into southern Scotland. And then Thursday again, although many places will start fine and dry with some sunshine, the showers will get going as we go through the late morning into the early afternoon. Again, they'll be heavy and again, they'll be slow moving. So some places getting a real soaking. Some spots, though, not seeing the showers, dodging them and staying dry with sunny spells and temperatures mostly around about average high teens or low 20s. We may see things turning a bit dry as we go through the next few days. Still some showers on Friday, but turning drier across the south. Some wet weather in the northwest on Saturday and temperatures just creeping up a little as we go through the weekend.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of